Karasu Tengu. Today's story is a true story of my own, about an incident that happened while I was in Japan during my time in the Marine Corps. Before I get into what happened, I'd like to start by explaining that growing up I had recurring nightmares in the early years of my life. I remember some of them, and none of them were particularly scary or featured terrifying monsters. In fact, most of them were quite simple. Sleepwalking, however, was something that I used to do occasionally, and some of my nightmares would incorporate this, such as one particular nightmare where I remember I would wake up in the middle of the night and begin searching my walls for a light switch. Upon not finding one, I would begin to panic and my room would feel endless and gigantic. I did not have these problems for long though, and eventually stopped having nightmares except for very select occasions. But still, they never contained a monster. Instead, I became a horror enthusiast, learning to love horror movies and found myself preferring to fall asleep listening to horror stories, as they interested me enough to tire my brain out. That brings us to January 25th, 2021. While living in the barracks in Okinawa, Japan, I remember this time of my service being particularly stressful, although I had been to Japan a few years prior. I had been having trouble sleeping and was becoming more and more stressed out as the days passed on. This particular night on the 25th, I lay there awake, likely playing on my phone until eventually I fell asleep at around 11 o'clock. My slumber did not last long, however, as my eyes shot back open in what felt like the same moment I had closed them. After getting a grip on my surroundings, I realized that I had wrapped myself up in my blanket like a burrito and could not move a muscle in my body. Having never had an experience like this before, a small amount of panic arose as I wondered what would happen next. Then I saw it. Standing by the door was what appeared to be a demonic creature resembling a cross between a bird and a man. As it started to move towards me, I took in the details of its face in my horror. It had a long white face ending in a sharp beak and empty black eyes. Looking at its eyes, I knew it was looking directly at me, but felt as though no emotion was behind them as the creature stared at me. Red lines were etched into its face along its beak, wrapping around its cheeks while the head sat on a black body covered in short feathers. No wings were present on the creature. Instead, it had long humanoid arms ending in large claws with long sharp nails. As it walked towards me, my panic began to rise until it was standing right next to my elevated bed looking down at me. Reaching over me, it gently placed a claw on my face before slowly dragging its hand across from my ear to my nose, cutting deep lines into my face with its razor-sharp nails. I felt the cool sensation of blood rising out of the cuts as it moved its hand to the base of my throat and began to slowly lean forward over me, inching closer to my face and staring directly into my eyes. The creature took one of its blade-like nails, and while hovering over my face with its own, I stared into its empty eyes in terror as it drove the nail into my throat and windpipe. I then shot awake, still wrapped up like a burrito and struggling to remember how to breathe, but thankfully I could move again. Obviously, none of the wounds I had sustained in the dream were real. However, I did feel as though I had run a marathon while never leaving my bed. The next day for me was spent in a state of fight or flight, as best as I can describe it. I felt weak, exhausted, lightheaded at times, and couldn't get over the terrified feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was as if my every move was being watched. I felt as though I was losing my mind, or had already lost it due to what had happened the night before. Thanks to a little research from some family, I learned some interesting information. There is a creature in Japanese folklore known as a Karasu Tengu, or a crow Tengu. A Tengu is described as an evil crow-like creature with the body of a man. Originally having long noses, over time they evolved to describe them as having formed beaks. They were known to live in trees and were accused of kidnapping adults and children, starting fires, and ripping apart those who caused harm to the forests. In Buddhism, they are described as disruptive demons and harbingers of war, and are a type of yokai, legendary ghosts, monsters, and spirits. While this sounds evil, the true nature of these demons is hard to distinguish, as some sources say they show themselves to protect or warn humans as well. In the years since, I have never seen the creature again. However, I have never forgotten the chilling details of this incident or the psychological impact it had on me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have a submission of your own, please feel free to reach out to me at awfultoastreads@gmail.com. Sleep tight.